Street Fighter 6 is adopting a hyper-realistic art style unlike anything the franchise has seen before. We list off at least 10 characters we think might not be able to make that transition all that gracefully. Some are instant nightmare fuel, and others just seem like they're meant to be cartoons. Listen to us count it all down on this week's episode of EventHubs Talking Block. We're closing in on 8,000 subscribers. So first of all, thank you guys so much for those of you that have subscribed. There is a huge discrepancy between the amount of people that have subbed versus that check this out. Guys, please, it would be awesome if you could subscribe. We are, you know how you get those cool like plaques, the YouTube plaques for like certain benchmarks of subscribers? We got our first one.
Really?
I haven't shared this with John yet, but we got the cardboard tier YouTube plaque.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah.
Hey.
So
yeah. All right. Well,
I'm gonna hang this up on the wall with a thumbtack.
Yeah.
And So, but so we did.
How many subscribers did we have to hit to get that?
You have to. It's right on there. You have to have subscribers.
Oh, boom!
Subscribers.
All right. So. Very nice.
All right, thanks you everybody. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is 10 characters Street Fighter 6's hyper-realistic graphic style won't work with. And I'm immediately going to say, of course this is subjective, and of course we only have a little bit of the example, and surely we don't even know if what we saw in the 38-second teaser is what will manifest in the finished product. But the internet loves to talk about this kind of stuff. Graphics are very important, especially in this day and age, and especially to Street Fighter. So before we get into it, I want to ask everybody, I don't want to bias you, I want to hear before you hear what we have to say. Could you go into the comments and you let us know if you think there are any characters that you think won't translate very well into Street Fighter 6's RE engine art style. And then I'll turn it over to you, John. What do you think about this before we dive into it?
Yeah, I've got a few characters in mind already that I'm thinking, and I'm wondering if they're going to show up. But get right into it, man. I'm very curious.
All right, so a couple of things to just consider really quickly. Would an in real life version of the character have to be a strong departure from who the character is? It's like, could you maintain what the character is with all of their perhaps exaggerated features, and would it still be the same character, or would it be like a really big departure from it? Would you have to sacrifice important visual attributes to make it work well? And then another thing to consider is, does it immediately turn into nightmare fuel horror mode? Because if that's the case, I would argue that doesn't really fit with Street Fighter's sort of atmosphere. And that's another reason maybe a character wouldn't fit. Okay.
We're not going Mortal Kombat 9 here is what you're saying, John. So,
right. Exactly. Well, that's, and I think a lot of people would have a problem. Like maybe if Capcom really wanted to go dark, but then you put Darkstalkers instead. So it really isn't Street Fighter, but let's get into it here. The first character I have on my list is the American hero Guile. Now, before I get into it, what's your reaction? I want to know what your reaction is to Guile.
Human beings without eyebrows kind of look a little bit weird. And
that happens. That happens, by the way. And then so it's a real life thing for sure. But we're talking about, would this be something that would work with the style and add to the experience, or would it be distracting and odd and so I'm sorry, but no eyebrows is going to be something, and like when you make that look super realistic, that's the thing. But go on, you were saying.
No, it's just, and then there's like the flat top and other stuff. There's a few things that just maybe don't translate super well. And those are the two things that jump out at me.
Yeah, and like you can see, there's such thing as a good Guile cosplay for sure. But any of them that like really try to do justice to the character, and you gotta have that weird pyramid-like head or hair, and that looks like it's so gelled that it's just plastic. And you can't do that accurately and make it look like a normal, I think of like mohawks and such, like in real life, right? And you might see a mohawk every so often, and like a real one with, the shaved head and everything, and maybe it's really big and, some crazy bright color, and you go, oh, whoa, that's something. That to me is still easier to process as, it's, someone's hair, and then like how quickly you get there, versus if someone was wearing Guile's hair, and it was true to who Guile was. So, I mean, you could turn him into the Jean-Claude Van Damme version of, in the Street Fighter movie, but then I think you're really going away from the character, and I don't think that counts. So, I am looking forward to see, because he's a pretty likely character to be in this game, how they handle Guile's visuals and what they do. So,
Yeah.
Next one up on the list, number 9, would be Abigail. Abigail is just massive. And so the character is 8 feet tall, I believe, which, I mean, sure, there have been a few people that are 8 feet tall in history, perhaps, especially if you count the biblical figures and such. But man, that's going to be kind of really difficult to make look good in a realistic, light, especially when you consider Abigail's proportions, man. You look at his muscles here.
He even looks bad in the cartoon form. Like,
yeah,
he is not a pretty dude. So I will just, it's like, I'm having some nightmare fuel stuff go on right now in my head. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to sleep that well tomorrow, John, with that image in my head. Thank you for that, by the way. So,
we have a couple more. I had not put Abigail forward as nightmare fuel, but now that you mention it, I think he does get a tick in the nightmare fuel box, especially diesel nightmare. So his muscles are ridiculous. He reminds me of, you remember the Power Thirst meme commercial thing that was from years ago when I was in high school? Well, there's a guy in there that's like a ridiculous bodybuilder. I don't know if it was photoshopped or not, but this guy, and I'll put it on the screen, reminds me of Abigail. And if you look at Abigail's head, his head, his arms look like the car, like the muscles inside are like there's a car in there, or two. It's ridiculous. And you look at his head. How many times could you fit his head into one of his arms? And like it looks okay in cartoon anime Street Fighter form, sure, but I think it kind of falls apart when you try to make that realistic. That's going to be scary. So yeah. I say Abigail, number 9. Number 8 is Dalsum, another very common character, one of the OGs. Now, Dalsum, man, he look, again, cartoon anime, just fine. But I imagine him in think about him in Resident Evil 7. He fits right in, right? Going around the Baker Mansion and Dalsum's just floating by, super kind of decrepit, just skin, bone, and some muscle that you can see through his skin, white eyes. And then he got those skulls, which don't take away from, a regular realistic looking human can have skulls. But I'm just saying, Dalsum immediately becomes nightmare fuel when you go into hyper realism mode. And a big part of it is the eyes. But then the fact that he's then stretching like the way that he does, and I think it's even worse if you put the beard.
You might have some people losing their lunch if you get too close to realistic on Dalsum, because again, he's stretching his limbs in a realistic way. For human beings, that starts to look really painful really fast. He's so skeletal, you can kind of see everything moving that you probably don't want to see.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah. Yes, you're right though. Extra Dalsum now.
Yeah, that's disgusting. Yeah.
All right, so we go from one extreme to the other. Number, what are we on? 10, 9, 8, 7 is Rufus. Rufus, he's really big, and again, going to Resident Evil, which is made in the RE engine, which also does not stand for Resident Evil engine. It's Reach for the Moon engine. Anyways, if you've played Resident Evil 8, you know the Duke. And I liken Rufus to looking somewhat like the Duke, who's just morbidly obese, right? And then you imagine, okay, fair enough, people can look like that in real life, but then when you consider Rufus doing a Messiah kick, it's like, how are you gonna? I can't see that being animated in any way that doesn't come across as kind of funny or gross. But it's. I don't see Rufus translating outside of his cartoon look. And I think, as kind of off-putting as they've made him already anyway for the game, I do think his design in like Street Fighter 4 and Cross Tekken looks really good. It's just keep it in the cartoon world.
Yeah, he's got a happy trail going on, which is going to be kind of an interesting thing. I don't know if you can pull it off realistically. You'd probably have to shave him. So... yeah.
you are with the alley oops for me here. The assists that you're picking up all the little bits that I missed here. That's really good. Okay, number 6 here is
John. Those are assists I'd rather not bring up, but I have no choice here. This is this is where my head goes. It's
thank you for the happy trail assists. Yeah. Hakan is our next character on the list. It's not just because he's bright red. You might be able to pull that off and still make it look good, but his hair, man. Like at first, I thought it was a helmet, or that's what people have said. But you look at it's connected to his facial hair, and then he's got these white hollow eyes, and he's supposed to just be a human, but he looks vastly different than anyone else, including his very beautiful wife. And I try to imagine what real life Hakan would look like. And I mean, if you accept that he could look like a vividly real cartoon character, then fine. But I don't think that's what you're trying to do here. You're trying to look like people that you might actually encounter, or people that, or I don't know. It's hard. It does not compute with Hakan. So
Yeah, that hair is going to be a real beast to kind of like make look acceptable on any way,
what
shape,
is
or
it?
form.
Like what is the thing? Is it rubber? Is it hair?
I think you'd have to shave them. Like that's the only way you could do it. Like
That's your solution for the last two in a row now. Is you got to shave.
It's shaving is about the only way to fix that Hakan's hair. But
I feel like if you cut that, blood's gonna come out. That's Mortal Kombat. Huh? Next one on the list here, number 5, is Birdie. And this is not so. I mean, maybe some of the stuff that we said about Rufus would also translate to Birdie, sure. But if you even go back to his original design, or not his original in SF1 is just kind of like a tanky looking white. He's like completely white in SF1. But then in the Alpha series, he
was
is
sick,
like
John. That's his excuse. That's the canon excuse. He's a white guy that turns into a black guy, and he says I was pale because I was sick. That is literally the in-game canon excuse for why Birdie is white in Street Fighter 1. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Happens.
Yeah.
He does transform. Like, well, I am kind of excited because if they follow the theme, Birdie transforms like his weight and his skin color, and what will they do next? Something crazy. Maybe they'll turn his hair from cheese into some other kind of food. But anyways, his alpha design is not all that realistic either. He's extremely top heavy. He has like a very big, chest and shoulders and such, and then he gets like really narrow waisted. This is really highlighted in the Street Fighter V nostalgia costume. I think that's the most pronounced there, but even in Alpha and such, you can see in the example, this character is like a weird C shape, and gets thin at odd places, and I don't see that translating into real life very well.
Yeah, his mohawk has a giant hole cut in it. And like making that look good in realistic graphics is going to be super hard to do. Like that alone right there is just going to, like, the suspension of disbelief you kind of need to get into. I think is going to obliterate Birdie as a hyper realistic character.
Yeah, because it is odd. It wouldn't, and technically that hole doesn't make sense. The
it doesn't
hair
make
above
any
it.
sense. Yeah,
and it has to be
he'd have
solid.
To, like, glue it in there or something like that. Even then, I don't know if that would work.
It would have to be a literal piece of giant cheese or something. Yeah, you're right. Good assist once again. We're on a roll here. Speaking of on a roll, nope, just kidding. It's not Blanca. It's Necro. Necro from Street Fighter 3, he is very similar to Dalsum. A lot of the things I said about Dalsum apply to Necro. He looks like he's made of rubber, though. He doesn't look like he's got the same insides as a normal human like Dalsum. I mean, maybe he does. I don't know, but he.
I think Necro's in like the 12 line of characters where I think he's like one of the prototype characters. So he's weird. He's more elastic or whatever, as you were mentioning. But yeah,
sure. And then blank yellow lights for eyes. This would be. He looks like Voldo from Soul Calibur, who's like often regarded as like one of the, if not creepiest characters in fighting games, and so. Necro animated in real life. I mean, it could look cool, but will it look good for Street Fighter? And will it capture, Street Fighter's? Will it be faithful enough to Street Fighter's style? And I know that they're already going on a big departure. So, like, what does faithful mean? You could argue about that, but there's a line, and if Capcom doesn't cross it, or if Capcom crosses it or does so not so gracefully, it's going to be a pretty big issue for a lot of fans. So. Did you have any more on
Yeah,
Necro?
it's kind of an uncanny valley of a situation where like human beings are going to look at some of these designs, and if they're too realistic, they're just going to kind of get the heebie-jeebies from it. And Necro definitely falls into that category. He's just kind of a weird looking character that I think actually looks really awesome in like an anime style of traditional
Hmm.
stuff. But if you made him hyper realistic, like I think people would be fairly uncomfortable just watching him fight. That might fit Necro players pretty darn well because that's kind of how they do their things. But he's kind of a dicey looking character if he's very realistic.
Hmm. Okay, so the number 3 on the list is Fong. I was on the fence a
Hmm.
little bit about Fong, but when it comes down to it, it's kind of his extremely long shape and like everything about him, from his fingers
Mm.
to his face. It's all it's themed in a very correct way, and because indeed he moves sort of like a snake at times with his poison or venom. I think is would be more accurate, right? But either way, you know, I just I can't see him in real life. I can see him again, like toned down and a really cool looking like assassin Fong character, like with his facial hair and the glasses and such. But if you were gonna be true to his design as we know him in Street Fighter Five, he's like really long and thin in a way that I don't see it. What do you think?
Yeah, well, his movements would be really uncomfortable. Like he would move in such a way that would be very unnatural, like almost to the point where you think he's like an alien or not human or some kind of weird thing, because I think he's like 7 foot tall and
Yeah.
just lanky as all can be. And so like him going through his movesets and other stuff like in a realistic way, that'd be very hard to design and not just make people do triple takes when they're trying to look at it and see what he's trying to do there.
Yeah.
It would be very, very, very unnatural.
Hmm. The number 2 character on the list is Seth. Seth is, well, a robot, first of all, and has been both kind of like masculine, but there's not much to him. Kind of like a blank slate, just gray, humanoid looking character, and then similar but evolved into like an imitation of Jury in Street Fighter V, where it just kind of has like the outline of breasts and long hair and different eyes. Same voice though, and maybe a little smaller in stature. But Seth just again, he would immediately be scary, and I think that like Dalsim, like some of the other characters we've talked about, he would be good for a Mortal Kombat style game, and you could make that character look particularly creepy. But with what they're trying to do with what we've seen in Street Fighter 6 so far, it doesn't compute for me.
Yeah, that one doesn't strike me as much because again, I think it's because it's a robot. Like humans in realistic styles, like tends to be a little bit more weird for me. But Seth, since he's a robot, he, she, they, them, whatever gender they randomly assign to him. It doesn't seem to irk me as much. Like what particularly like standout things do you think wouldn't translate super well?
Well, this actually ties into another thing that I'm sort of on the fence about, and I think the community would be as well. But here's a question that'll inform the rest of this: does movement factor in here? And
Oh
by
yeah.
that I mean, like, if you have a character that does like Dragon Ball Z or like Maximum Spider super movements, like Zeku's super, right, in Street Fighter Five, where he like zips around and it's a very anime kind of cartoon style movement. Are characters allowed to do that in a more realistic game, or does that pull away from because Seth does that a lot, like a lot of teleporting and sudden like anime movement and like 100 hand fists and things like that, like Chun-Li's lightning legs or Honda's 100 hand slaps. But Seth has two versions of those kinds of moves, and that also doesn't translate to realism to me. But I'm on the fence about whether or not people would accept that generally, or if that would be a factor for them.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to pull off, I think, and make that look good. And then, Seth is a very powerful character, like very tall in stature and very, other stuff. And so having them zip around the screen can also look very unnatural as well.
Mhm.
So I can see the fit not being that great with there.
Yeah. So that's sort of I kind of, especially with that. Maybe if we're not counting movement, then maybe Seth wouldn't be as big of a thing here. But we're going to say we're counting movement because Seth's on the list here. And finally, my last one here is Oro. Just because Oro is
Ooh.
really, really old, like over 100 years old, and but he's like a
And
person.
disgusting as all hell on purpose. Like he's constantly picking his nose and doing other stuff. Like he has no boundaries whatsoever. That
I
most
know they
normal
covered
humans
him
would
up
have.
in Street
Yeah.
Fighter 5 too, but could you actually see his stuff in Street Fighter 3 when he was
Yeah, you
doing
could.
his crouching and
It,
like they
it's
just animated his
it's like a
jump?
single frame or a couple frames of animation. There's not a lot, but
I mean,
it's
it's just
there.
a line between, I mean, that's all it is, but it's, you know, the implications there, and they
More
didn't
than
do
a
that in
line. You got to
5.
give Oro some credit, man. It's not that small,
Oh, does
but
he have a wrinkle? No, I mean, I meant like there's just like a line to indicate a separation between genital A and B, you know, but that's not what's important. Important is I don't think that they would animate that into Street Fighter 6 either way, and I don't I don't need it. He still is a character I wouldn't want to see. There is a video going around recently, and I don't know the validity of it when it comes to numbers, but it's supposed to be a 109-year-old monk. And my wife was scrolling Instagram or something, and I saw it on her phone. I was like, you know, I double took, and I go, oh, that's, you know, because the man looks like a doll at first, and then you see him move, and you go, whoa, and but his you can see Oro's skin is, you know, that's kind of what they're going for. They're like, this guy's, you know, hundreds of years old or however, and I don't see it looking good. That's another immediate horror kind of a thing. So it's going to be a nah for me, dog.
yeah, I don't think there's too many 130-year-old people running around out there. And then I think Oro, by the time Street Fighter 6 rolls around, one might be dead, and then two, if he's not dead, he might be like 145 or something like that.
Mhm.
So you know, I don't think age has been particularly kind to Oro, nor is junk. So we'll see how
Right.
that goes. But yeah.
And I just want to say, so that's my list here, and you'll notice Blanca isn't on it. I think Blanca is a character that should be addressed here. I've seen some really good, realistic Blanca art, and unlike most of these other characters, Blanca kind of has something of an advantage or something here in that I don't know that there's as much of an expectation for realism, but like because Blanca's sort of invented of his like he's just like a Capcom's monster, what he might look like in real life, I think there's a little bit more wiggle room, something like that, which is why I didn't put him on this list. I think I just think Capcom could do a really good job with Blanca, and I can see him in this, you know, RE engine. So
Actually, I wanted to add that like video games are very well known for their graphical aesthetic appeals, basically, and
mhm.
and it doesn't mean that, you know, everyone's got to be a supermodel or whatever and stuff to be in these games. It's just what will look good and be appealing to viewers. And I do think, like, you know, characters as you mentioned, like Oro and others, they actually look really good, relatively speaking, in their current iterations. But the big difference here is, again, as you're saying, when you go to hyper realism, does that translate? Is that going to
Mhm.
translate? And it just, in a lot of cases, as you're outlining here, it just doesn't. So this is not about, you know, like body shaming or age shaming or anything like that. It's like what's going to be appealing for gamers so that they'll actually pick up and play these characters or buy them or do the other kind of stuff. And if they're grossing you out, you know, kind of thing, that's probably not a good look. And just certain designs that work well in anime just don't work with hyperrealism. So there it is.
Yep.